step into my office. Let's run the open, Elliot.
The appointments are lined up.
You waiting for somebody in there?
Got an appointment.
And it's not about what you want to hear, but what you need to hear.
It's not personal. It's strictly business. It's time you and me had a private talk, Winger. Step into my office.
It's Step Into My Office with Michael Lombardi. Mr. Lombardi, we'll see you now.
Yes, this is how we recap the big news in sports through the lens of a former NFL GM, Michael Lombardi. Some athletes and coaches in need of advice, and Michael is here to help. And because you have already mentioned it a couple of times on this show, the first person that has an appointment with you today is Rickie Fowler, coming off of that U.S. Open appearance where he has the code lead going into the final round, but ultimately shoots a 5-over on Sunday, had 3 bogeys through 7 holes, 7 on the day, finishes 5 strokes off the lead. So what does Rickie Fowler need to hear after blowing his best shot at winning his first major in forever?
You know, I think what Rickie Fowler has to do is acknowledge that there is the existence of a problem deeper than just the swing. You know, he went with Butch Harmon. He's changed his swing. He's working at his game. And I think he's got to turn this negative into a positive. And I think he's got to talk about it. And I think he's got to express it to himself. Like, look, I haven't won in 4 years. Acknowledge it. I need to get better on Sunday. Acknowledge it. I need to do the things that'll make me better on Sunday. Acknowledge it. And I think that ultimately is where you need to go. You have to identify with your past to create a future. And I think Rickie needs to do that. And I think ultimately, whether he works with a sports psychologist or whether he does meditation, whatever it is, you know, he's got to ramp up his desire to be the best, right? He's got to ramp that up to a level never seen before, because if he doesn't, he's going to be back in the Sunday position and those demons are going to creep back into him. And you could see it early Sunday, you know, the first drive. You know, I looked at my son Matthew and said, this isn't going to be good. You just knew it, you know, and there's only person who can control this is Rickie Fowler. So to me, I think he's got to stop being happy for everybody and start being mad at himself. I think that would be the biggest advice you could give him.
He has been close a number of times in major championships. The 9th career top 5 finish in a major, second most of any player in the last 80 years without a win. That is not a club that you want to be a part of. And that opening round 62 broke U.S. Open records. It was actually the lowest score in any round in any men's major championship historically, and just can't get it home come Sunday. How about in the NFL? Let's go to our guy D-Hop. DeAndre Hopkins visited both the Titans and New England Patriots last week. No deal was struck as he walked out of the building. He's reportedly, though, in no rush to sign anywhere right now, taking his time in free agency, but he's looking for a deal similar to our guy, Odell Beckham Jr., who the NFL world collectively said, what in the heck did the Baltimore Ravens do paying this guy $15 million, $18 million when you include the incentives there? So if DeAndre Hopkins, Michael, steps into your office today, what are you telling him about his value as a free agent at this point in the offseason and how he should approach this next month?
You know, understanding value is the hardest thing we have to do in all walks of life, whether you're a superstar wide receiver or whether you work at some tech company. It's what value to bring, and the market determines it. And I think for Hopkins, unfortunately, because of you know your situation, there are not a lot of teams that have the ability to spend. So I think the more time you wait, the better off it's going to be for you to get closer to the contract that you feel most comfortable with. However, that being said, you also put out a statement of what the criteria is for you to go join another team. So is it about money or is it about the criteria or is it about both? And it can be about both. I mean, look, this is your opportunity. You're 31 years old. This might be your last bite at the apple. And you got to maximize that. I fully understand that. So, you know, to me, I think waiting is probably the right thing to do, because if you were going to get that huge contract, it would have happened instantly, and it hasn't. So wait, see if there's teams that maybe go to camp in the first week of camp and they see their receivers once we get pads on don't look the same as when we didn't have pads on. You know, there's a lot of Buzz Lightyear players out there now that look great, but when the pads come on, they might not look the same. So I think it's a smart play. Be patient, but you also have to understand that the value will only be determined by what people are willing to play. You can't create your own value. You have to wait for the mercy of others. That's unfortunately where we are in this league. And if you're going to sit there and say, I'm not signing until I get $15 million, you may be deciding you're not going to play football.
Yeah, we'll see if that number in terms of what teams are willing to give ultimately does get driven up a little bit based on what they have in camp. But As of now, DeAndre Hopkins still available on the free agent market. How about in the NBA? Frank Vogel was hired as the new head coach of the Phoenix Suns back on June 6th. On Sunday, the Suns agree to a deal, sending Chris Paul, Landry Shamet, and several draft picks to the Wizard as they bring on Bradley Beal. Phoenix now has, 5 players under contract for next season. If Frank Vogel is in your office and he's asking for advice with a team that has a lot of offensive star power but not a lot of depth, his first year with an owner that clearly has high expectations to win now, what are you saying to Frank Vogel?
Frank, you just basically, you might think you're the head basketball coach at the Phoenix Suns, but basically you're back at Wildwood Catholic where you started, right down the road from me here, because you're going to have to develop talent. You got 5 guys that are getting paid a lot of money, and they're going to be the core component of your team, but you've got to become a high school coach, and you got to find young players to develop them. And you got to have your best year of player development that you've ever had. And you can't complain about it. There does you no good at all to complain about the lack of depth or the lack of experience or the lack of talent in your second unit. It's your job to develop them. And you've got to spend time in the summer with the summer leagues when it goes to Vegas. And then in August and September of really focusing on the strengths and weaknesses of the players you bring in. They're not going to be what you want, but you're going to have to find the right role players that complement the 5 that you have on the team. And then you got to work their tail off. And then you've got to sit there and say, we may not be perfect in November, but we're going to be a hell of a lot better in March. And take that Miami Heat approach with you. Because this is really going to be about how you develop talent, not how you coach Kevin Durant, not how you coach Devin Booker. This is going to be about how do you develop talent and how do you get the best out of those other guys. Because the way this cap is set up, they're all going to be minimum contract players. And you're going to have to take your skill as a developer and model that into this team. That's going to be the biggest challenge.
Such a stark contrast from a team like the Denver Nuggets, who we just saw win an NBA title, that was patient and grew a team and drafted well. And, you look at the moves that they made were supplemental moves, like bringing in a Bruce Brown, for example. So very, very different strategy that the Suns are employing here, plus 350 in the Western Conference. Second shortest shot to have that Western Conference win this year. We'll see how things ultimately play out. All right, let's go to Sean McDermott, back to the NFL. Last week, Bills had plenty of headlines as it pertained to wide receiver Stephon Diggs, skipped mini camp practice day 1. Then McDermott comes out and says it was excused. He was back on the field day 2. McDermott will also be calling defensive plays for the first time this season in his Bills tenure, a long-held desire that, Michael, I know you believe is what forced out Leslie Frazier. So I'm Sean McDermott. I'm coming to you. Michael, I know what it takes to be a head coach. I know what it's been like to be a play caller as well, but now I've got a lot of things going on in my head at once in a season that is pivotal for my team in the Buffalo Bills. Help me out.
Well, I think the number one thing is, Sean, you've got to really handle your time well, because if you're going to if you're going to call the game, you got to be involved with the game plan, and you got to feel comfortable that Ken Dorsey can handle the offense and Danny Crossman can handle the special. You got to feel very comfortable with where you are as a football team. And if you're going to do that, there has to be a voice that comes through the entire team. You just can't be the defense coordinator. You have to be the head coach. And I think you also need to explain to your team why you wanted to take over the play calling, why you feel like you're better at this than Leslie Frazier is. They owe that. You owe them that, because you replaced a coach that was very popular on your staff. And they need to know the reasons why you're doing that. And they got to come to you with those problems. I think it should be full disclosure. But I think the other thing you've got to be really good at is you've got to be able to understand how to manage the game on game day, and how do you want to handle those situations and what you want to do to the best of your ability to give your team a chance to win. It isn't about what calls you make on defense. It's how all those calls affect the other 2 units of the game. So to me, that's going to be critical. The other thing, you got to stay healthy. I mean, one thing about Buffalo, they've got a lot of older guys on defense. If you're not as healthy, you're coaching the defense. You got to be able to develop some talent.
A lot on the tightrope for this balancing act and head coach Sean McDermott going into 2023 for Buffalo.
Go to VSiN.com/subscribe to become a VSiN Pro subscriber today.